The cliff shadow swallowed them before the sun finished its work. From the flats, the hot gates looked like nothing more than a seam in the rock, a cleft where the river and the road vanished together between the cliffs. The cliff walls on either side climbed upward without apology, sheer and patient, their faces worn smooth by wind that had spent centuries learning the same direction. To someone passing through the flats for the first time, it would not look like a settlement entrance. It would look like a place the world had forgotten to close. The river slid beside the path as Tic Tic and Izel approached the throat under escort. The water ran shallow there, barely to the shin, but the cut between the cliffs was broad enough for both river and road. The water moved steadily toward the seam between the cliffs, with a deeper voice than it had carried out in the open. Sound behaved differently near stone. Even wind had to think about where it went. Behind them, the mesquite land stretched quiet again, as if nothing had happened there at all. The Longfang's shadow had vanished into the brush hours ago, but the memory of it still lived somewhere between the shoulder blades. Predators did not forget. Neither did the land. The sickle-claw riders slowed first. Their mounts lifted narrow heads and let out low rasping breaths as they approached the throat. The animals' sickle claws stayed raised as always, curled above the earth like questions that never touched ground. One rider raised 2 fingers. From somewhere high above the cliffs, a hand returned the signal. Tic Tic didn't look up. He didn't need to. Ash Forge watched its own doors. The passage narrowed quickly. Rock teeth lined the inner edge of the path, harmless-looking shelves of stone that could trip a charge into broken knees if the ground turned ugly. Oil gutters ran along the shadowed wall, disguised beneath roots and cracks. Overhead, the anchor points for the slag nets rested quietly in their sockets, like sleeping snakes. Nothing about it looked like a trap. That was the point. To the outside world, the hot gates were simply geography. To Ash Forge, they were a decision. Inside the throat, the air cooled slightly. The sound of the river deepened as the current pressed harder against the stone, and the path curved just enough that the world behind them vanished entirely. A rider leaned toward the rock and spoke softly.
Clear.
Tic Tic stepped forward again. Stone closed around them for another 30 paces. Then the passage opened. The bowl revealed itself, the way a held breath finally decides to leave the body. Ash Forge spread beneath the cliffs, like something grown rather than built. The river cut through the center of the bowl, brown-green and steady, splitting the settlement into 2 uneven halves before continuing toward the throat behind them. Homes and work sheds clung to both banks, where the ground was flattest. Smoke drifted from cook pits near the water's edge. Slag heaps from the forge sat dark and quiet under the afternoon sun like old scars the land had accepted. 2 rope bridges crossed the river, their planks swaying lazily where the current brushed the supports. People moved through it all with the rhythm of work. Children chased one another along the shallows near the river bend. A woman lifted a basket of fish from a drying rack. Hammer blows from the forge rang somewhere further back against the cliff wall, each strike steady and deliberate. Life continued, but watchers stood on the rim, and nets hung coiled above the throat. Ashforge never truly slept. Tic Tic and Izel followed the riders along the river path toward the far side of the bowl. The cliff there curved inward slightly, forming a natural terrace raised above the town. The chief's hut rested partly inside the rock itself, its roof extending outward over an open space where ceremonies and gatherings took place. Behind the settlement, at the far end of the bowl, a narrow waterfall spilled from the cliff face and fed the river's beginning. The spray drifted through the air like pale dust before joining the current that carried the town's life toward the gates. Near the terrace stood the drum dais. 3 great drums rested in their frames. Gate, river, sky. They waited the way tools waited, silent until the moment they were needed. Yana appeared first. She stepped from the shade beside the hut, with her ledger tucked beneath one arm and a smudge of ash along her sleeve. Her eyes moved from Tic Tic's face to the dust on his boots, then to the small tear in Izel's sleeve where mesquite thorns had caught. Inventory first. Questions later.
You came back quiet,
she said. Tic Tic reached into his belt pouch and placed the strip of grey cloth in her hand. Yana turned it once between her fingers. Her mouth tightened.
Not ours.
No,
Tic Tic said. The chief stepped out behind her. He was not a large man, but the space around him behaved as if it belonged to him. His hair had been braided back with thin wire ties, and the scars along his forearms lay flat against the skin like old agreements. His gaze moved from the cloth to Tic Tic.
What ground?
mesquite flats,
Tic Tic said.
near the river trail.
And
Izel answered.
Longfang then disturbed.
The chief's expression didn't change.
Cub crushed.
She added. That earned the first reaction. Not fear, interest.
not Eden?
No,
The chief looked briefly past them toward the bowl, where the quiet movement of the settlement continued.
Boot prints.
He asked.
4.
Tic Tic said.
Disciplined at first. 1 dead. Longfang crushed him.
The chief nodded once.
And after?
Running.
Yana's charcoal moved quietly across the ledger page. For a moment, no one spoke. The drums remained silent. The chief reached out and placed a hand lightly against the frame of the gate drum. Not striking, just feeling the wood.
Ground's talking.
He said finally. His voice carried easily across the terrace.
Listen first.
Below them, the settlement continued moving through its work, but small changes began to appear. A pair of archers crossed the river bridge, carrying bow bundles. 2 sickle-claw handlers led their mounts toward the pens with quiet efficiency. At the throat, watchers on the rim shifted positions along the rock ledges. Preparation, not alarm. Ashforge understood the difference. 2 river wardens checked the culvert nets where the water narrowed toward the throat. Along the rim, sling teams rotated positions, trading stones for fresh bundles without speaking. Near the sickle-claw pens, a pair of young riders tightened saddle straps and checked claw sheaths on their mounts. No one shouted orders. Ashforge simply adjusted itself, the way a living thing adjusted its breathing. Yana closed the ledger.
What do you want done?
The chief looked at Tic Tic again.
Tracks still fresh?
Yes.
Then we learn their shape.
He turned slightly toward the rim path.
Send scouts, quiet ones.
A runner appeared before the words had finished echoing. Yana gave him the brief instructions. The boy nodded and vanished back down the stone path. Izel rested her club against her shoulder again, testing the injured arm once more.
You're not sending him alone.
She said. The chief gave a faint smile.
I rarely send Tic Tic alone.
Tic Tic glanced toward the rim, where the runner had gone. Wind moved across the bowl in a slow, thoughtful sweep. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, the flats waited in heat and silence, holding whatever had pushed a Longfang mother into rage. The chief spoke again.
Riders leave tomorrow afternoon.
He looked once more at the grey cloth in Yana's hand.
Find out whose ground we're standing on.
Tic Tic nodded. Down by the river, a hammer struck the forge again. The sound echoed up the cliff face, like a promise the bowl had made long ago and had no intention of breaking. Tomorrow the scouts would ride, and somewhere out on the flats, something had already chosen its direction. Forge fires burned lower, their light turning from working orange to the softer red of coals resting between strikes. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons toward the rim, where the last of the daylight faded against stone. Tic Tic stepped into the shade behind the chief's terrace, where a narrow wash of river water had been diverted into a shallow basin, worn smooth by years of use. He set the crossbow carefully against the wall and began loosening the straps of his armor. The leather creaked quietly as he worked. Dust had settled into the seams. One shoulder plate carried a thin scratch where mesquite thorn had caught during the retreat from the Longfang. Nothing serious, just the sort of mark that reminded a man the land kept its own tally. Izel arrived without announcing herself.
You missed one.
She said. Tic Tic didn't look up.
I was getting there.
No,
She replied, kneeling beside him.
you weren't.
Her fingers found the strap beneath his shoulder plate and loosened the knot in one smooth pull. The leather slackened, and the plate shifted free. Tic Tic rolled his shoulder once as the weight lifted. Below the terrace, the sounds of ash forge carried upward. A hammer strike from the forge. Voices near the river path. The restless shifting of sickle claws in their pens. Home sounds. Izel checked the stitching along the armor seams.
Mesquite.
She said.
Yes.
Good thorn.
He grunted agreement. She took a needle from her bundle and began repairing the seam where the leather had stretched. Neither of them hurried. After a moment, Tic Tic turned the crossbow across his knees and nudged the loop lever once with his fingers. Tick. The sound was small, but clear. Izel smiled faintly.
Your favorite noise.
Useful noise.
She tied the final knot and tapped the repaired strap once.
Good.
They moved to a small cooking fire someone had abandoned near the path. Izel reached into her pouch and pulled out a strip of dried river fish. She held it over the coals until the edges warmed, then broke it in half and handed him the larger piece. Tic Tic accepted it without comment. They ate slowly, watching the bowl settle into evening. After a moment, Izel leaned forward and picked up one of his bolts from the ground beside the fire. The fletching had bent slightly during the run through the mesquite. She straightened it between her fingers.
You rush.
She said.
Sometimes.
Sometimes gets people killed.
Tic Tic took the bolt back and slid it into the small quiver at his hip.
Not today.
Izel watched him for another moment. Then she nodded. Once.
Not today.
Orange light climbed the trunk of Tic Tic's tree and stopped halfway up the ladder.
Your bed still swings?
She asked.
Yes.
Still the best one in the bowl?
Tic Tic shrugged slightly.
Up there the wind moves.
That's not a reason.
It is to me.
She laughed quietly. After a while, she stood and lifted her club.
Don't fall out of your tree.
No promises.
She walked back toward the healer huts without looking behind her. Tic Tic crossed the darker slope toward the trees, clinging to the bowl wall. Most of Ashforge slept near the river. Tic Tic preferred height. His tree leaned away from the cliff, roots twisted deep into stone. From below the hut looked like nothing. That was the point. He lowered the heavier armor pieces into a rope basket. Climbing in full plates made noise. Metal spoke loudly in quiet places, and quiet places were where hunters survived. He hauled the rope. The armor thumped softly onto the platform above. Tic Tic climbed after it. Inside the hut, everything had its place. Bolts lined a narrow rack. Tools rested beside wax and oil. A coil of climbing rope hung from a peg. The bed hung between two beams on braided rope, swaying gently in the wind. Down below, voices drifted faintly from the river. Up here, the air moved differently. Tic Tic ran his thumb along the ratchet teeth. Tick. The sound was quiet, but it felt like home. Night settled over the bowl. Forge hammers stopped. Fires shrank to coals. Ash Forge dimmed one light at a time. On the rim, watchers took their posts. Wind moved through the grass. Above them hung the great light. Some called it the far world. Children called it the big moon. No one in Ashforge claimed to understand it. It simply existed. Then a thin line of light rose along the horizon. A streak. Climbing. Another watcher saw it.
Another one. My grandfather said those were stars being born.
Your grandfather said a lot of things.
Still live to 70.
They watched the streak fade into the pale glow around the far world. One man crossed two fingers against his spear.
Never seen one go that direction before.
Silence followed. Then,
Think anyone lives there?
the other shrugged.
If they do, they're far enough away not to bother us. Good place, then.
Below them, the bowl slept. The river whispered. Sickle claws shifted in their pens. Then one lifted its skull toward the flats and hissed. Another answered. Then a third. A watcher glanced down.
Calmado.
He murmured.
Only the wind.
The mounts did not believe him. Their eyes stayed fixed on the dark beyond the cliffs, and somewhere in the mesquite night, something had already begun walking toward Ashforge.